Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
We're back on the Nada Yada Island Confessions Show. Benny is about to tell us how he found two loves. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks to Metro, I found iPhone 12 and Apple Watch SE.
At Metro, get the perfect match of both iPhone 12 with 5G and Apple Watch SE for only $99.99. You heard that right. Both for just $99.99. Holidays with Nada Yada Yada. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
Bring your number and ID, sign up for Metro Flex Plus, and add a watch line. Not available if you're with T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days. Limit 2 per account.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Pizzagate was the most recent scandal, but there have been scandals and accusations before. Follow me down the rabbit hole about the Franklin scandal. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we're going to talk about the Franklin scandal, which was basically like Pizzagate before Pizzagate. Because I don't know, how many weeks in a row can we talk about child abuse before we all go a little crazy? I don't know, honestly, I don't know. But before we get into that, of course, I love to thank our sponsors. I literally would not be here without our sponsors, guys. So thanks to Wise Wolf Gold for sponsoring this podcast. If you guys need precious gold, silver, precious metals, check them out. You can go to rabbithole.gold and you guys can get subscriptions for as little as $50 a month. Of course, there's bigger subscriptions if you want. And this is a really cool gift if you want to give it away because it is the holiday season. Either way, check them out, rabbithole.gold, or you can follow the link in the bio. Also, a couple other things that I put in the show notes. I meant show notes, not bio. I always include our merchandise link. So if you guys want like shirts or anything like that, there's a link. There's not like a whole lot of things right now. I'm actually working on some really cool merch coming up, but that's still an option. And then also our Patreon. So I have a Patreon every single week. You get the episode a week early and ad-free from The Rabbit Hole. You get the Cult Chronicles episode the week of, but it's ad-free. You also get a bonus episode of my opinions of the month's episodes. And I just like give away random things in there. I sometimes do polls of like what you want to hear next. So if you guys want to have a say in what you hear and you want to hear it a little early, you maybe just want to support me as a podcaster, all those things are fantastic. Follow the link in the show notes to Patreon, or you can go to Patreon and just like search for Rabbit Hole Conspiracy Theories and it'll come up. So check it out. It's pretty cool. I like to interact with people there. I have a lot of fun. You get a little welcome gift. It's all good things. So check it out. Anyway, enough about that. I feel like I don't ever plug myself, so I needed to do that a little bit before we get into this week's episode, the Franklin scandal. So last week we talked about like all the military accusations or allegations of the 1980s. These were all leading up to the Franklin scandal. The Franklin scandal was huge back in the 80s. So like I said, this was Pizzagate before Pizzagate. So a few of the big differences were that this Franklin scandal was against the Republican Party instead of the Democratic Party. And it was originated out of a credit union instead of a pizzeria. This was based out of Omaha instead of Washington, D.C. A couple differences. Nothing really is different besides those couple things. But this one is just as bad, I think, because kids literally came forward and were like, hey, we're being abused. And they're like, no, you're not. Nope, that's not happening. So in 1988 in Omaha, Nebraska, Lawrence E. King was a rising star in the Republican Party. So I don't want you to confuse him with the Larry King, the radio TV host. Not the same guy. This guy was a black guy instead of a white guy, and he ran a credit union. but I will refer to him as Larry King because that's what everybody refers to him as in all the research that I found. So he ran the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska. So in the early 1980s, the credit union was floundering, and that's when Larry King came along and he took over as general manager with the hopes of saving the credit union. I don't know what his background was before he took over the credit union. Like, did he have a history of saving credit unions? Did he have a financial background? It's completely unclear what was his credentials, but he came along, he's like, I could fix this. And they're like, okay, whatever, we don't care because the thing's going to shut down anyway. Go ahead and try. And then he saved it. And just a few years later, I mean, the credit union was thriving. It was a thriving business again. And because he did such a good job, he started to get a lot of public recognition because he saved this credit union that was going to just basically go away. And he wanted to be in politics a little bit more, so he started showing up in those circles. But he was kind of known because of the amazing work that he did with saving the credit union. But like I said, he had gotten into local politics, and he was doing really well in local politics too. Like, it seemed like everything he was touching was turning into gold. And it seemed like he was really getting his life together. He even volunteered at local, like, orphanages. There was an orphanage called Boys Town, and there's also Girls Town, and they're both like almost like boys and girls clubs, but this is where children that didn't have homes, they lived there, and he would go and volunteer and be around the kids, and he was like a mentor to these children. And so he's got his whole, if you look at him from the outside, you don't know any of the inside stuff. He's got this credit union gig where he's saving this credit union. He's in local politics. He's doing fantastic. He's like really rising in the Republican Party. And then also he's a mentor to orphaned children. Like, what a guy. Except he was not a great guy. He was an awful guy. So this dude had so much going for him that he actually sang the national anthem at the 1988 Republican National Convention in Omaha. I mean, he was the guy to be seen with because George Bush's daughter, so George Bush Jr.'s sister, was seen with him at political parties, and she actually like wanted to be seen with him. This was mentioned pretty significantly in my research that she would like loop her arm in his and they'd walk around together because it was such a big deal that he was coming up. Like I said, he was going to be a big guy. So she was like, look who I'm friends with, and look who's friends with me. This guy needs to be seen with me because I'm a Bush, and I want to be seen with him because he's really going places. But the point is, King was getting a lot of recognition in the Republican Party. People wanted to know him, wanted to be around him, wanted to be seen with him, and wanted him to be seen with them. But it would all soon fall apart. But in order to understand all of that, we need to kind of like back up a couple of years to see why it was all crashing down. In 1985, there was a foster home where several of the kids had come forward saying that they weren't being treated very good. They complained to their school that they were being abused, smacked around, beaten, and sexually abused. But the couple that had fostered these kids, that had these kids in their custody, were the Webbs, and they were highly regarded in town. They were friends with King, and the wife, actually, Barbara Webb, was King's cousin. And the husband, Jarrett Webb, sat on the board at the credit union. And King is becoming this big guy. These two people are well known in the community. They're like pillars of their community. They've adopted kids. They've fostered kids. I mean, they've got a lot of things going for them too. So people are like, no way that the Webbs are abusing you. That just doesn't make sense. I mean, these people literally got awards for being good parents in their neighborhood. Like it's just crazy that they would be abusing their kids. Well, this is the 80s, and the kids were like, well, it was already hard enough for us to come forward. Please believe us. But nobody did, of course. But at this point, it wasn't just the kids in the foster home, because it was also kids from Boys Town and Girls Town, those orphanages that Larry King was a mentor at, was a volunteer at. So, and the kids, they didn't all know each other, but they all had very similar stories. That they were flown to the East Coast and were forced to have sex with men. And the kids could point out and or name some of the people that were at the parties that they were taken to include the Bush family. And at this point, it would have been George H.W. Bush, so Bush Sr. But, I mean, if these kids who are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old can point out Bush, like, that's how you know that they've seen this guy a decent amount of times, right? Euless Washington was one of the adopted daughters of the Webbs, and she told stories about Uncle Larry King. Euless was actually instrumental in this scandal, so she reportedly remembered King handing a video over to the Webbs, and she later found the video because, 1980s, it's probably VCR or VHS tape. So she played this video, and it was child pornography, which, of course, is illegal. She was also one of the ones that was taken to the parties that were being thrown and was a part of pedophilic orgies. And in fact, she was the first of 7 kids that would come forward about King. She stated, quote, "Larry King set up the pedophile ring. From my knowledge and from what I saw go down, he was the man who got it moving and rolling. Everything went through him. He loves boys. He loves them like he shouldn't," end quote.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
This episode is brought to you by Hulu. The new Hulu original true crime docuseries, Vow of Silence, The Assassination of Anna May, examines the murder of Anna May Aquash, a Mi'kmaq mother and activist who fought for Indigenous rights in the 1970s. The gripping investigation into her mysterious death, unsolved for 30 years, reveals a web of cover-ups and betrayal. Vow of Silence, The Assassination of Anna May, is now streaming on Hulu.
So she's come forward. She talks to the police. The police are like, no way. She actually ends up taking 3 different polygraphs and passing all of them because they straight up did not believe her. They're like, you're just making this up. Why do you not like your Uncle Larry King? Well, that wasn't the case. The case was that she was being abused by him and nobody wanted to believe her. And so she took 3 different polygraphs. She's a child, by the way, just a child. She takes 3 different polygraphs at 3 different times and passes all 3 of them. And still they're like, yeah, I don't know if she's really trustworthy. She's just a kid. But there was another little girl who had a troubled past and was placed in foster care by her mother. She was placed actually in the girls' town home. And she told the admins at this foster home that she was being abused by a man named Larry King. And she was not associated with the Webbs at all. So it's not like you could be like, oh, well, he goes over there. You see Larry King. Maybe you just don't like him. Like in Euless's case, maybe you just don't like your Uncle Larry King. You want to say really horrible things about him. This little girl didn't know the Webbs. She didn't know, she just had the exact same story as the first little girl, right? So you can't chalk it up to just like meeting King and then creating a story. I'm not saying that that's how they got rid of Euless's case, but it does seem like a convenient way to be like, maybe you just don't like your uncle. You're just saying really bad things. But by 1986, his name was now being associated with a pedophile network along with his work at the credit union. So his name was being used twice because half the people are like, oh my gosh, do you know Larry King? He fixed the credit union. He saved the credit union. He's an up-and-coming politician. He's going to do great things in this world. And then the other half of the world is like, oh my gosh, have you heard about Larry King, the pedophile? He's doing terrible things to children. And for whatever reason, 1987 was kind of a quiet year for these allegations for Larry King. I don't know. He was probably still doing whatever he was doing. He was just not being called out for it. In 1988, a photographer named Rusty Nelson was being investigated by the Omaha Police Department. So he worked as a photographer at Republican fundraisers and events, and he was under investigation because he had asked a young girl to be a model for him and to come back to his house and he would take pictures of her, which at first you're like, whoa. But her mom was not dumb and she went with her. She was like, yeah, I'm not letting my little daughter go with you to your apartment to be a model by herself. This just is like a recipe for disaster. What a mom. In the 80s, like most moms would be like, yeah, whatever, just do what you want and make sure you're home by whatever time, right? Nope. This mom was like, I'm going with you. So They go to the apartment. The apartment was at, there was these two apartments. It was called Twin Towers in Omaha, not to be confused with the Twin Towers in New York, which were still standing at the time. So they go to the Twin Towers, and the mom starts noticing these images of children that were just laid out on his table. So you got Rusty Nelson focusing on the daughter, taking pictures, whatever. Mom's bored, probably looking around, just doing what most people would do. And she notices these pictures on the table. So she's like, oh, these must be other pictures that he has taken of children, modeling for him. Totally normal. But these images were of naked children and children that were not dressed appropriately, children that were in really compromising positions. She did not like this. So she was like, okay, daughter, we got to go right now. And she and her daughter left and immediately reported Rusty to the cops, which good on her. What a woman, man. We got to give her applause. I don't actually know her name, but she did a fantastic job, a good thing reporting this guy. So, during the investigation, Larry King's name comes up yet again. The apartment that Nelson was in, the Twin Towers, was actually sublet to him by Larry King. But it's found that King didn't just sublet that apartment, but he also owned the penthouse, in the apartment complex. So, this guy is subletting this apartment to this Rusty Nelson guy, who happens to just be a photographer for the Republican National... it's just a coincidence that he's the photographer for the Republican fundraisers and events and stuff like that, and then also taking pictures of naked children. Child pornography. Right? That's just a coincidence that Larry King happens to sublet his apartment to him. As the investigators talked to the people at the complex, there was actually suspicion of King going there with young children, and he was seen going in and out of the apartment with a bunch of different children. Obviously, often enough that people noticed, but no one reported anything. And at first, this kind of didn't sit well with me because I was like, what the heck? You guys see this guy who doesn't have kids going in and out of his apartment with just a number of kids. How do you not report something? Well, first of all, you don't have any evidence that anything bad is happening. Secondly, this guy is a pillar of the community and he volunteers at the orphanages, so maybe these are just kids that he's volunteering with and he's just hanging out with them. I don't know. It feels really weird to me that a single man would be hanging out with a bunch of different kids in his apartment alone a lot. But I guess, it's the 80s. Nobody cared. I don't think that's true. I think that they just, what do you do about it, I guess, was probably the thought. So it was about this time that an actual investigation into King started. So King's name has come up so much in association with child abuse, child sex abuse, child pornography. There's a lot of different suspicions. So they now are going to start an actual investigation into this guy. They didn't do anything when the kids reported him, but now that adults started to notice something weird, now it's a problem, right? Whatever. This is also when they started to really look into the credit union. And what they found when the credit union was going under this audit, they found that the funds just weren't quite adding up. And in fact, it was somewhere between $30 and $40 million that was unaccounted for. $30 and $40 million. In the 80s, that's so much money. Well, turns out he was running this Ponzi scheme at the credit union with CDs and all this crazy stuff. But this all kind of made sense, kind of all started to add up because King didn't get a large salary at the credit union. He got something like $55,000 or $60,000 a year. Not a lot, but he was spending upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. So we're talking limos, jets. He's got this apartment that he's subletting to Rusty Nelson. He's got the penthouse, which on his salary from the credit union, maybe he could afford the apartment, but not both. He's not also affording limos and private jets and all these different things that he's doing. He's flying privately to the East Coast often. So this is where people are like, whoa, no wonder the funds aren't adding up because he is stealing the money to fund his life. But my question really came Larry King was a nobody. He decided to fix this credit union, and then all of a sudden he's the guy? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Well, turns out he was the guy that could get you anything you wanted. You know how like we see that in movies or whatever? They're like, oh, if you need anything, this is the guy. Well, Larry King was that guy. So you want drugs, you want girls, you want whatever you want, he's going to get it for you. And other people started speaking up about the parties that he would throw. At one point, it was reported that the party goers killed an infant girl in like what seemed to be a very ritualistic way. And rumors started to fly about other things that he was doing. So like devil worship, cannibalism, drug trafficking, and CIA arms dealing were all mentioned. But again, nothing could be directly tied to Larry King. So with all of these allegations, it was decided that they needed to come up with this Franklin Committee, which was a formal investigation into King, but like the Warren Commission type thing, you know? So if you think about JFK and the Warren Commission, their whole job was to give you the story in a nice, neat little box with a ribbon on top, right? So the Franklin Committee was that same thing. They wanted to give you the story the way they needed to make sure that it was packaged with a nice, neat little ribbon on top and everything was perfect. That's the point of this committee. The committee chair was Senator Loren Schmidt, and Ernie Chambers was the vice chair, but there were 10 other senators on the committee as well. This was like a bipartisan committee of senators, so it was Republicans and Democrats. It seems to me in my research that I found that Loren Schmidt might not have been in on the stuff, on whatever was going on, the child pornography, the sexual abuse of children, the drugs, the arms dealing, all of that. I don't think Loren Schmidt was in on it. And also at the time, Loren Schmidt was like super, super old. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It seems like he wasn't in on it. However, other senators on the committee were in on it because they were guiding the committee. And this committee really relied on the chief of police in Omaha to help them, which was Robert Wadman. And he actually, funny enough, had been pictured with King many times before the scandal broke. So we know that he didn't want the truth to come out. I mean, he was accused by 4 victims to be at King's parties. And in fact, at one point, when an officer under him was getting really close to uncovering what was happening with King, he had the officer pulled and had his mental competence tested because he was like, no way, this guy, something's wrong with him. We don't trust him. So that was the original investigation into King. And they were getting really close with Rusty Nelson and all that. This officer was going to break this case and he was going to find out everything. And that's when the chief of police, Robert Wadman, was like, oh yeah, nope, pull that guy. Something's wrong with him. I don't trust him. Let's test him, like test his mental abilities because something's weird with that guy. But nothing was. He was just like on the right track. But Wadman had a lot to cover up and a lot to lose if this police officer actually found out what was happening. And he told the press that every step that should have been taken by the police was taken. But it was found that he was photographed by Rusty Nelson having sex with minors at the parties. So not only can he be like eyewitness accounts of him being at these parties, there's also photographs of him at these parties. So that's a lot of evidence suggesting that the chief of police was crooked for sure. But that wasn't the only time that justice was stopped in this case. The committee actually hired a private investigator to look into the allegations a little bit more. They're like, hey, we need somebody to really dig in, really look at everything from an outside perspective. Because yes, we're going to lean on the chief of police, but we also want a third party's opinion. So this guy digs in. And then, strangely, in a tragic twist of events in July of 1990, the investigator and his 8-year-old son were killed when his plane disintegrated midair near Chicago. Foul play was suspected but never proven, so he must have been getting close. He must have known something. He actually he was bragging that he was about to blow the lid off the Franklin case, but he never got a chance because his plane literally just broke apart mid-flight. Like, how does that even happen? Literally, pieces were just falling off left and right until there was nothing left. How tragic. Oh my gosh.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Amazon for all your gifting needs.
But the same month the investigator dies, a separate county investigation by a grand jury decided that the allegations were baseless. It was determined to be a carefully crafted hoax. They thought the stories all started with a disgruntled ex-employee of Boys Town, the orphanage that he was volunteering at, and that this person had personal grudges against Larry King and just fueled the fire. Of course, they never named that person because they wanted to protect their identity. There was no person that was a disgruntled employee or ex-employee. They just needed to tie this thing up because everything they have goes against the evidence that they had. Like, the verdict goes against all of the evidence. They had victims that were not even at the orphanages. They had Euless Washington, who had taken 3 polygraphs on 3 separate occasions, said that she's not lying about what she's saying, and yet they never contacted her for her official statement. They left her out of the investigation altogether. But instead of believing the victims or looking for the evidence and prosecuting King, 2 of the victims were actually charged with perjury. One of them, Alicia Owens, was sentenced to between 9 and 15 years in prison and ended up spending 2 years in solitary confinement. And that's more than any other woman in Nebraska history. But I think that she only actually spent 4.5 years total in prison. So 2 of those 4.5 years were in solitary confinement. Like, that is terrible. And Alicia and the other victim, Troy Boner, had corroborated each other's stories. And the private investigator who mysteriously died had taken the testimony. So he had these videos of the 2 of them in their own interviews telling their stories and both of them like corroborating each other's stories. And when those videos were handed over to the grand jury, all the parts of them corroborating each other's stories were edited out. Yep, you heard me. The evidence was tampered with. That way, nobody knew the truth. That way, the victims could be wrong. And this is kind of where they base their perjury charges on. They're like, well, you guys are saying one thing, but I mean, we're looking at these videos and there's no story. Like, these stories aren't adding up. King was later indicted on embezzlement charges and got 15 years in prison for that. But any wrongdoing related to the pedophilia, child porn, or anything that happened at the parties were all swept under the rug. And at one point, it was said that if you pull this string, it goes all the way to the top of the Republican Party. And at the time, again, that was President George H.W. Bush. So nobody wanted that. The chair committee, Lauren Schmidt, admitted, quote, "I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller would not identify himself, but he said, 'Lauren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union.' And I asked who I'm speaking with, and they said, 'That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation.' And I said, 'Well, why not?' And he said, 'It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans.'" So this thing went all the way up. I mean, again, so did Pizzagate, right? Pizzagate went all the way up to the tops of the Democratic Party. It just depends, like, who's in charge at the time, right? So, like, at this point, the Republicans were in office, and so they were the ones being charged with this scandal. In 2016, with Pizzagate, the Democrats were still in office, and Hillary Clinton was running for office, and so they were thinking, like, Trump's not going to win, and Clinton's going to get in, but, like, look at this pedophile ring. These people are literally, like, sweeping it under the rug. Nobody cares. But don't worry, because it's all connected. It really is. So if you remember at the end of last week's episode, and we talked about Lieutenant Colonel Michael Ankino, so he was at the center of a lot of the Army bases, daycares allegations. This guy was a lot of people pointed the finger at this guy. So turns out he and Larry King actually knew each other, and he was identified in the Franklin case by one of the victims. But he wasn't the only one. Rusty Nelson also identified Aquino as the man that he once saw King give a briefcase full of money and bearer bonds to. King also told Nelson that Aquino was involved in the Contra gun and cocaine trafficking operation that was being run by George Bush Sr. and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. So this guy, terrible guy, known Satanist, like literally has his own satanic temple in all of this, and he's been named by many victims in several of the different cases that weren't connected to each other, by the way. But there seems to be this common link between all the pedophile rings, and it's not just like pedophilia, but I mean, we see this with Pizzagate, the Franklin scandal, Bohemian Grove, and it's all this satanic ritualistic part of these pedophile rings. And it's no wonder we see Satan being portrayed in the media so much. I mean, we see it in music videos, at concerts. We see celebrities like dressing in clothes that would signify the devil. We see them talking about it openly. I mean, the devil is referenced in subtle ways that most people probably don't even notice, and in ways a lot more like in your face. The eye in the triangle is a good example. We see this like all-seeing eye, or this eye of providence, on our money. It's thousands of years old, commonly associated with the third eye, and its association with this greater force, or like something watching over us, is pretty powerful. But we see celebrities like covering an eye, or like doing a triangle around their eye, or doing the like OK symbol with their fingers around their eye, and that OK symbol has been referenced to be like the 666, so like another sign of the devil. We're seeing this constantly. They're like putting it in your face. And it actually makes me wonder, like, when they do this at concerts, you have so many people there that are like enjoying the music and they're getting into it. Like, does it just make the ritual more powerful? I'm gonna do a whole episode about this, like the Left Eye Club. We've all seen those videos and those pictures of celebrities in their left eye, or not just celebrities. I mean, the elites in our country and other countries, like their left eye, they have a bruised eye. I mean, we just saw this with Jay Leno. Like, the entire left side of his face was black and blue. Like, he said he like hit a tree or he fell down or something. But I mean, he had an eye patch over his eye. Like, he got beat on the left side of his face. And it actually went down his neck too a little bit. This guy he looked rough. And Jay Leno's like old. So I don't know if he could really handle all that. But I mean, we've seen King Charles with a black eye. We've seen Bill Clinton with a black eye. We've seen all these very prominent people in the world with black eyes. So I'm going to do a whole eye episode. Also, it's been requested a lot, the Red Shoe Club episode. That's going to be a really big one. I mean, we see the black and white checkered print, which is commonly associated with like Masons, like the Freemasons, and in every single Masonic lodge, there's black and white checkered floors somewhere. But you'll see that same pattern in music videos, album covers, fashion shows, all these different things yet again. But for now, I think that the biggest lesson that has to come from all this is just like how far and how wide this pedophile ring has gone and will continue to go. I mean, as far back as 1940s is one of the things that actually one of you sent to me was Shirley Temple once told a story about when she was 12. She was meeting with the executives at MGM, and she said that they separated her and her mother, and that she went with one of the executives, her mother went with the other one, and when she was there, like, she went to the office, and this executive basically exposed himself to her at the age of 12. She's just a little kid. But casting couches, like, haven't gone away, and in fact, I think they've gotten worse. I was actually, last March 2024, I was at the Podcast Evolutions conference, and there, working the merch table, was just this lady. She works random events, and she was trying to become an actor because this conference was in LA. So she was trying to become an actor, but like in her spare time had to work these events. And she was telling me this story about how, like, everybody that you see in Hollywood, every single one of them, they've gotten there not by good means. Like, they have had to do some really shady things in order to be famous. So you think like, oh, like how nice, this person that my kids can look up to. Nope, they've gotten there by like really shitty ways. And she went into some details. I don't remember all the details right this second, but it was interesting to hear it from her because she's like in the industry, or she's trying to be an actress, and she said that she couldn't expose herself the way that you needed to become successful in Hollywood. But whether we call it Pizzagate, or we call it the Franklin scandal, we call it casting couches, or whatever we call it, the problem still persists. And the fact that we can't seem to stop it, and every time it's reported and rears its ugly head, so many people in power like rush to shut it down and keep it quiet. They call us conspiracy theorists because we're coming up with these crazy ideas. They're not crazy. They're not crazy. You just won't let us prove them. And anybody that gets too close to it, you're just going to like kill them or throw them in jail, or throw them in jail and then kill them. If they fear that somebody is going to expose their pedophile ring, they get rid of that person by any means necessary. It's that bad. And honestly, like, I don't know what we can do to stop this, because I've thought about it. I was like, well, we need to do something. We have to stop them from hurting children. We have to stop them from doing that. I don't know how to stop it. And this cancer is so embedded in our politics, celebrities, elites. I don't know if it'll ever get exposed or go away, or if we can ever stop it. But again, they'll just continue to call us conspiracy theorists because they've debunked it. The Franklin scandal, nobody was charged in that case. It was just accusations. It was just a disgruntled employee. Those kids, they didn't know what they were talking about. They were just told what to say. Those pictures, don't worry about those pictures. I mean, we see it with the Finders. Those pictures, don't worry about those pictures. Pizzagate. Oh, those weird emails. You guys are just making things up. This is ridiculous. Everybody sends emails like this. No, they don't. If everyone sent emails like that, we wouldn't have found that little thing that was weird. We wouldn't have found how weird it is. At the end of the day, I don't know what to do. I just know that by talking about it, by telling you all and hoping that a lot of people listen to this podcast, listen to this episode, and they can hear the truth, that maybe we can do something, because they can't kill all of us. So, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.